I created this Venn diagram to help me grapple with Adorno's negative dialectics and Hegel's dialectics. So this is the article I went back and looked at again for this week, and it did make a whole lot more sense. Last week, I was kind of struggling with understanding Adorno's place in postmodernism, because the more I was reading about his concept of non-identity, which I'll go into in a second, the more I was wondering, well, this kind of just sounds like postmodernism overall, so I wasn't sure what stood him apart, what defined him as his own, concept, or, well, ironically I said concept, but what defines his ideas amongst the sea of postmodernists. So this week I went back and reread, and both times I have been adding to this Venn diagram ideas to the different compartments. But this week I understood that he was actually writing and publishing before postmodernism and post-structuralism was kind of a thing yet. So it said that his ideas became kind of like what they called it, the obsession of postmodernists and post-structuralists. So now to go over the ideas. So the blue circle represents Hegel's dialectics, and this circle represents Adorno's negative dialectics. So in Hegel's dialectics, he believes in what is what they call absolute idealism, and some of these terms are defined and described in my dictionary notes that I also shared with you and Emily. So absolute idealism is kind of like this complete trust in concepts and having those concepts to come up with a definition of our identity. And this process creates these self-enclosures in terms of identity and how we identify, that relies on reason and thinking. So this kind of leads to this act of compulsively identifying things that Adorno was saying is not necessarily accurate. So Adorno wasn't going completely against Hegel or this concept of dichotomies that they both did not agree with. He was actually just kind of veering off in a different direction. So it describes the tenets that he shares with Hegel as what kept him and his ideas from going completely into what they describe as intellectual nomadism or no identity, which says that identity is so dispersed and pulled apart that there's just no hope of ever getting to a reconciliation. And that's also called radical negativity. So in the center we have Adorno's negative dialectic. Well, in the center we have the parts of Adorno's negative dialectics that overlap with Hegel's. So this isn't really like a true Venn diagram. I just created this chart to help me conceptualize or understand these things. It's so hard not to talk about concepts. Okay, so Adorno's non-identity is different from no identity in that it acknowledges that you do, in fact, like Hegel said, and with his absolute idealism, have to think. And there's this labor of thought, and there's this dialectical mediation that occurs. But instead of coming to a specific absolute identity, your thought process isn't just thinking directly about identity. You're thinking even about the way that you're thinking, because you acknowledge that yes, you do have to think in order to have an identity or to be, but it's more accurate and sufficient to understand that your thinking itself is embedded in this structure of concepts. So you have to constantly think about that in order to be able to think more holistically about identity. So the difference between non-identity and no identity is that in non-identity, it's kind of like a no identity where you're not coming to a specific resolution about identity, but there's this very present hope for reconciliation of opposites, which is brings it closer to Hegel's absolute idealism. It hopes for reconciliation, but it's saying, hey, it's not that simple. You don't just throw something in a category. You really have to think about the way you're thinking about that thing. Okay, so I guess that's my grapple. I hope I didn't bore you to death. All right, thanks.